I'm Brian Foster, and this is the Grindhouse Institute. On each episode of this podcast, Jeremy Floyd and I program a triple feature movie night. Each of the movies share common themes, and we discuss them here. We're happy you could join us for today's block we call The Road to James Bond. Bond first appeared in literature and on screens in the early 1950s, but he didn't become the character we all think of until the 60s. Films like Dr. No, From Russia with Love, and Goldfinger established this indelible image of James Bond. This version of Bond was brought to life by Albert R. Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman with their production company Eon Productions. Eon has made 26 Bond films to date, including one slated to come out this year. Today's show focuses on films that helped influence Broccoli and Saltzman's conception of Bond and establish the template for the franchise. In 1941, Rick's Cafe, a swanky nightclub run by American expat Rick Blaine, is the last stop for refugees fleeing the Nazis. When one of those refugees turns out to be Rick's former lover, he has to decide whether to stick his neck out for her and her husband. Humphrey Bogart looked sharp in his Bondian white dinner jacket and rose lapel in 1942's Casablanca. At the height of World War II, a group of British Royal Marines embark on a dangerous espionage mission. Using two-man canoes and the cover of night, they have to sneak in behind enemy lines to sabotage German ships without being seen. Trevor Howard and Jose Ferrer star in The Cockleshell Heroes from 1955. After being mistaken for a secret agent, Roger Thornhill is sent on a cross-country adventure to save his own life. Along the way, he's framed for murder, chased by a crop-dusting biplane, falls in love with a beautiful, mysterious woman, and is chased across the face of Mount Rushmore. Cary Grant is the Bond-esque mistaken super spy in 1959's North by Northwest. Thank you for listening to the Grindhouse Institute. Please enjoy.
My secretary is a great admirer of your methods, Mr. Kaplan.
Wait a minute. Wait. Did you call me Kaplan?
I know you're a man of many names, but I'm perfectly willing to accept your current choice.
Current choice? Well, obviously, your friends picked up the wrong package when they bundled me out here in the car.
Do sit down, Mr. Kaplan.
All right, welcome back to the Grindhouse Institute. I'm Brian Foster, and with me, as always, is Jeremy Floyd. Hello, and how are you?
Hey, how's it going?
Oh, man, I was waiting for a Casablanca line. Man.
I wish I had one for you.
Not prepared for that one, huh?
Yeah.
Today we have a very special show, yet again, with a very special guest. Jeremy, if you don't mind, I'll take the intro on this one.
Yeah, go for it.
Considering this is the first time you've ever met this person.
Yeah.
Today we have the multi-hyphenate, if you will, producer, director, editor, very much a writer as well. And he's even done some really cool special makeup effects in some horror movies you might have seen. Yeah, very cool. And most importantly, one of my favorite instructors and mentors from school, Bruce Civilly. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. And here's looking at you, kid.
There we go.
There we go.
Somebody's going to fill in that one.
Yeah,
all right.
yeah. I think I just lost my co-hosting position.
Well, you'll always have Paris.
Yeah. Yes, this guy on a roll.
Today's show is going to be looking at what has been called the road to 007, if you will. We're going to be looking at three films. Bruce, would you mind introducing the films?
Sure. The three films we're looking at. First one is from 1941, Casablanca, which is the movie that made a romantic star out of Humphrey Bogart, who'd been playing gangsters up to that. Then we'll go to Cockleshell Heroes from 1955, a Warwick production. We're going to talk about what Warwick means and why that's significant. And then North by Northwest, 1959, a Hitchcock film that kind of set the style for what would later be the James Bond series. And we might get into that a bit with Dr. No.
Yeah, cool.
Awesome. Yeah, this was exciting. Yet again, this film buff that's a host of this show has never seen any of these movies. I think Cockleshell Heroes I can get a pass on because I don't think many people have seen that one.
Yeah.
It had been years since I saw that one.
Right.
Casablanca and North by Northwest I had absolutely no excuse for, but seeing these for the first time, first of all, Casablanca, nowhere near what I thought it was going to be, and such an incredibly good movie. And North by Northwest might be my new favorite Hitchcock. I thought it was just incredibly fun.
The reason I chose these films is I was thinking about movies that have elements that you see popping up later in the James Bond films. So that, Bond didn't just come fully formed out of nowhere. There's sort of the roots to Bond in these earlier films in various ways.
That's interesting because I had gone back and sort of read all the Bond books, a couple years ago, and what's in the books and then what the movies became are two totally separate things. And I think this is a really interesting portfolio of how the Bond films got made, and just how different they are from the books. Because, again, there's sort of like the way that some of these archetypes that we're about to look at here get played out over and over again in, the Bond movies, which is an interesting contrast from what I was kind of expecting when we first were talking about like the origins of Bond.
Well, the books are a different animal, and those sort of have their own origin stories going back to the Sapper stories, Fu Manchu books, all these sort of British detective things from the 20s and 30s. Bulldog Drummond, was another inspiration, I think, to Fleming. But, Fleming had a brother, Peter, who was writing travel books and was very highly regarded in literary circles. And I think Fleming resented that a little bit. So he started writing his own book series. But unfortunately, he didn't get the critical accolades that his brother did, but he made a lot more money.
Yeah. It's certainly more widely remembered. But precisely because of Broccoli and all the Eon movies.
Right.
Yeah, I guess what this is like more accurately is like the origins of sort of the Eon Bond. Mm-hmm. Not so much just the character in general.
Eon being the production company, correct?
Yeah, it's Eon Productions, and there are some books that say that Eon stands for everything or nothing. That when Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman joined up to make these movies, they started Eon Productions, and it was everything or nothing for them. But that's not really what it is. All law firms have what they call shell companies, which are companies that are already set up. They just don't have any officers. They don't really have anything they're doing or any, they're just a shell, just waiting for someone to come in and take it off the shelf and make a company out of it. And when they went to their attorneys and said, we want to start a film company, they had a shell company called Eon. So it has nothing to do with meaning everything or nothing. It just happened to mean like a span of years,
Mm-hmm.
An appropriate title, I guess, considering how long the movie series has lasted.
Yeah.
What are we on now? The 20th Bond film?
Oh, beyond that, it's 25 or 26. I forget which one it's going to be. I've lost count, which is saying something. Yeah, I think, from the very beginning with this film, you've got the exotic women. We're in a strange, foreign, exotic locale at the beginning, and eventually we're introduced to the character of Rick Blaine, which is the Humphrey Bogart character, and the way he's introduced, we don't see his face for a while. We see his hands, we see him signing the chit, and finally, as he's lighting a cigarette, the camera goes up and we see his face.
Right. Rick Blaine. Yeah.
Very similar to how Sean Connery's introduced in Dr. No,
Yeah, exactly. Wow.
And then just in terms of, the way Humphrey Bogart and all the scenes that take place in Rick's Cafe, he's in the white dinner jacket with the bow tie. He looks very Bondian. Mm-hmm. And the thing that really stood out to me after some years of not seeing Casablanca and seeing it again is how Rick is a character who, aside from his emotional involvement with Elsa, is totally in control of himself and self-assured and cocky as hell. Mm-hmm. So even when the Nazis are coming in and all this, he's trading barbs with them.
Yeah, but unlike maybe the hero we'll get to in North by Northwest, like he still has a bit of vulnerability to him, and also unlike the movie Bond, he doesn't sort of end up with the girl, right? And it's like, and I guess also mostly book Bond as well. I mean, I guess Casino Royale in the book, he doesn't end up with her. Moonraker as well. In that sense, as a prototype, it's still sort of being developed with the Rick character.
Well, and I think that, again, one of the things Rick and Bond have in common is, and I've got to go back a little bit here, when Casablanca was made, it was after we'd been in World War II for about a year, right? Mm-hmm. But the movie is set just right before Pearl Harbor.
Right.
So,
Okay.
and before Pearl Harbor, the attitude of most Americans was, that's their war, it's not ours. We don't need to get involved.
Hmm.
We just want to worry about ourselves and not the rest of the world. Then Pearl Harbor happens, and suddenly people realized we have to be responsible and participate in what's going on. And the Rick character in Casablanca is the absolute personification of that. Throughout the beginning of that movie, he's like, I stick my neck out for nobody, right?
Yeah.
But then Ilsa comes back into his life, and he kind of comes back to life and realizes by the end that he's got to, get involved with this war and help win it. So in a way, he's like Bond in that regard, in that he puts the mission before his personal attachments to the women in his life.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, but also like his sort of perfectly neutral attitude or whatever Claude Rains called it. All that's a facade. I mean, he's he's definitely he was fighting with the Lincoln Brigade or whatever, or at least helping to fund the Lincoln Brigade when during the Spanish Civil War. The Ethiopian thing too. I mean, he knows, perhaps like most Americans in whenever this is supposed to be set, 1940-ish, that it's not something you talk about in terms of wanting to get involved, because that'll get you labeled as a commie. But it is something that he believes in, obviously, and but he won't show it to anybody.
Yeah, I think at the beginning of the film, he's really a broken man because of the way he'd been abandoned by Ilsa in Paris.
Yeah.
So basically, he ends up hiding out there in Casablanca, running this cafe with Sam, who went with him, he's just a beat down character and someone who I think has kind of lost his desire to go on, lost his zest for life.
Of all the gin joints in all the towns in all the world, she walks into mine.
Yeah, he has to kind of exercise it a little bit. Yeah, like the those demons out. But it's also tough because it's like he himself is very much an unreliable narrator through a lot of it. He says one thing and does another. He's constantly giving people the cold shoulder, but also helping the people out. Right, like when at the very very beginning, I can't remember her name. The woman's at the bar stool, the sort of French woman. And talking to the bartender, and she's getting too tipsy, and he makes sure that she gets home safe, type of thing. Not to mention the woman who was they didn't come out and say it, but essentially gonna have to sleep with Claude Rains to get an exit visa for her and her husband.
Right.
And he helps her out.
It was pretty clear that that's what they were getting at. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just enough to sort of dodge the the Hays Code or whatever. But clearly that's where this thing was going, and and they keep hinting at that. That's how Claude Rains spends his days, trading on all these desperate people in Casablanca.
What you're saying though is that these people are trying to leave the country through. Are from Casablanca. There are travel papers that need to be signed or carried with them wherever they go, and that this seems like a very valuable piece of paper or a very valuable document for these folks, especially the ones that
Right.
are trying their hardest to work with some of these shady folks that are there to get them out of the country, as well as those that are trying to keep them in the country.
Right, exactly. And
Yeah, and that's the sort of MacGuffin that.
yeah, I was just about to say, like such a Hitchcockian, device. Yeah.
The engine of the plot, the letters of transit. Yeah.
Yeah, because there were like two different ways to get out of the country, and one of them was these letters of transit, and the other one was sort of an exit visa, and
Right.
it was just. But you kind of know that there's some documents out there, but sort of the details are a little fuzzy in your mind, I think, while you're watching it.
And I think another sort of Bondian element I see in this is Colonel Strasser, played by Conrad Veidt, who could almost be a Bond villain. The sort of
Yeah.
European villain with class.
Right.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like he sits there and explains his master plan to you, Mr. Bond. That kind of thing.
And in Conrad Veidt, he'd been in film since the silent days. He's the somnambulist in Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Yeah, he's the man who smiles.
Exactly, man who
Or,
laughs. Yeah.
Man who laughs. Excuse me. Yeah.
And was on the short list to play Dracula until they got Bela Lugosi. So.
Right.
But yeah, I think his performance as Colonel Strasser is I wouldn't say chilling, but he does seem like someone you don't want to mess with. He's like a scorpion. You kind of, just waiting to
Yeah,
sting you.
exactly. But man, just as a very bizarre aside, how strange was it that old Conrad Veidt looked like young Martin Landau in sort of North by Northwest? Like,
Yeah.
they kind of had a really interesting I don't know, you're like, oh, if you're like, oh, that's his cousin or whatever, you'd believe it, or it's like, that's nephew.
Karloff, sidekick.
Exactly.
I will say too that in the same way that in Doctor No you get the James Bond theme played more times than in any other Bond film, I think. You get a similar thing in Casablanca, where you get As Time Goes By played repeatedly.
Play it, Sam. Play As Time Goes By.
Oh, I can't remember it myself. I'm a little rusty on it.
Yeah. What's interesting, just while we're on the topic of sort of casting, at one point I had kind of thought of doing Casablanca, Maltese Falcon, and Notorious as a block, which all just amazing movies. Really, the only strong connection was that it sort of ports one cast over from another one, and then ports it onto a third one. But man, how interesting was it to sort of look at these movies in this format? In terms of how the troubles of three people not amounting to a hill of beans relates to James Bond.
Yeah, and that's the other thing about Casablanca. I think it has more quotable lines than any other film ever made, including Let's Round Up the Usual Suspects, which is where the movie The Usual Suspects gets its title, And also, talking about cast, you got Peter Lorre, who was the first James Bond villain.
Oh, in the TV version of Casino Royale?
The TV version of Casino Royale, he plays Le Chiffre.
Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Yeah, he didn't have as big of a role in this one as he's had in other films. He gets wiped out of the story pretty quick.
Pretty quick, yeah. But while he's on screen, he absolutely commands it. Rick, Rick!
Hide me. And speaking of the pairing of Humphrey Bogart and
Peter Lorre?
Peter Lorre, how great was Sidney Greenstreet in this, and how memorable it's second only to I love to talk to a man who likes to talk to a man who likes to talk.
Yeah, and I like how he's just always got his little fly swatter.
Yeah. I'll be sure to pay that to myself. I mean, and Sidney Greenstreet, maybe it's kind of a Blofeld or one of those guys, maybe Goldfinger, type, kind of a prototype for that.
All he needs is a cat.
Yeah.
How's business at the Blue Parrot?
Fine, but I'd like to buy your cafe.
It's not for sale.
Haven't heard my offer.
It's not for sale at any price.
Right, so the reason I chose Cockleshell Heroes is because it's a Warwick film. And Warwick is a company that was started by Cubby Broccoli and a fellow named Irving Allen. So they were producing partners in Warwick. And it was basically set up because in the 1950s, the UK was trying to attract a lot more film production to England. So they started this kind of rebate program called the Eady Plan, where they had funds set aside that if you came to the UK and made a movie using a predominantly British crew and British cast, you could get access to Eady funds as to help pay for your budget. So Broccoli and Irving decided they would take advantage of this and started Warwick Pictures, which got the name Warwick because they came up with the idea while they were sitting in the Warwick Hotel in New York. But they're basically the two Americans producing these films. And the first few they made starred Alan Ladd. So it's these American producers, American Alan Ladd, making movies in England. They also brought with them a screenwriter named Richard Maybaum, who wrote most of their films. The first one they did was called The Red Beret, 1953, which was also known as Paratrooper in the U.S., I think. But it's, World War II drama. They then went on to make all these other films that are usually set in exotic locations, other places within the British realm. They did a few films in Africa, but that's kind of what they were known for. Were making these sort of almost men's adventure pictures set in exotic locales with a couple of American stars and British cast, British crew.
Now that you say that real quick, that kind of reminded me of, you mentioned it briefly about Casablanca being that way. And it's interesting because it's like, it's from the perspective of an American, Rick, but who's in this exotic land of Casablanca. And then the only other place we see him is in Paris. So it's like, we get this stranger in a strange land perspective, especially for like, an American audience. And it's interesting that like that is sort of the key that sort of, draws out the sort of Broccoli Saltzman, interests,
Well, not Saltzman yet. I mean, he comes in the picture later, but Irving Allen. Funnily enough, later on, Broccoli and Allen were still sharing a partner's desk, sitting literally across from each other in their offices in England in the early 1960s. After they've split up the partnership, and now Cubby Broccoli's making James Bond films, and Irving Allen's producing little movies here and there, but he sees all the money that Cubby's making with the Bond films, and he's like, I want some of this. So he starts his own series, the Matt Helm movies with Dean Martin.
Oh, crazy.
So these movies are all kind of tied together in a way. But the other reason for watching a Warwick film is because most of the crew that would go on to work on the Bond films, production designer Sid Kane and Ken Adam, DP Ted Moore, and stuntman Bob Simmons, who was Connery's stunt double, is from the Warwick films. He's also the first screen James Bond because he's the guy in the gun barrel. And Dr. No from Russia with Love and Goldfinger.
Okay.
If you look at the Blu-rays of that on a big screen, you can really tell it's not Sean Connery.
Yeah, that's funny.
And the director, Terrence Young, who did Dr. No, he made the first film that Warwick did called The Red Beret or Paratrooper with Alan Ladd. And continuing that on forward, one of the last films they made was called Tank Force. I think it was 1958. It was near the end of their run. And that film had an alternate title, No Time to Die.
Oh, there you go.
Hey.
Yep. So it all ties together.
Yeah.
It's a conspiracy, man.
Yeah.
I'm glad we're connecting the dots here. This is great.
Yeah. This will fit in with your JFK episode,
Yeah.
So everything ties together, man. And actually, Broccoli, later on when he was interviewed, said of Warwick Pictures, he said, we're not making British pictures, but American pictures in Britain.
Right.
And then he went on to kind of make it worse by saying, I make films to appeal to the lower common denominator. That's why I'm still in business while the arty-farty boys are not. But that was Cubby. Cubby always wanted to make films that entertained, and sometimes let that get the better of him with some of those later Roger Moore films. But but you can see too, even with the James Bond films, even though they're British films and made in Britain with British cast, they still have a very American essence to them in their style and pacing and so on.
That's true, and I guess I would say that this one though felt more British to me. I mean, like the sort of like very stiff humor and some of the stuff in the barracks, for instance, like it felt almost like a heritage film, which the British would kind of go through in the sort of 80s and do these films of like the glorious yesteryear when the British Empire was strong, and we had certain people going through these all boys schools and whatever else. Like that, it was like this weird series of nostalgia films that they did in the 80s, and this had a little bit of that sensibility. And I think because this is like slightly a nostalgic film itself, like sort of reverent nostalgia film that the British have.
To me, it's very much a film of its time, because from about the early 50s, mid 50s on into the mid 60s, movies in general to me seemed a lot slower paced than they were even before that, and certainly after that, where they really took their kind of leisurely time. And here you've got a 90-minute movie where a good 60 minutes of it is guys training. You know.
Going far.
I'm terribly sorry. I don't speak English.
Pity. Neither do I.
What an interesting movie, this Cockleshell Heroes thing. I mean, it's kind of like, like maybe a prototype for Guns of Navarone or Dirty Dozen, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
And, I'd say in terms of that, like, this is sort of the rough draft of what something like Dirty Dozen became, which kind of, was able to refine some of that stuff and, make the action a little more hard-hitting and all that. But, it still managed to have some interesting relations with the, Jose Ferrer character, the Trevor Howard character. For the longest time, I was like, man, like Trevor Howard, it was bothering me. I couldn't place him, and he's the sort of lieutenant or whatever it is in Third Man. It's like, I'm English, not Irish. It's Callaway.
And he's one of the Kryptonians in Superman
the
movie. But, one of the things that struck me, not having seen this movie in a long time and watching it in the Bond context, is how Jose Ferrer is kind of the Bond figure in this. Mm-hmm. He's the young guy who just wants to go out and get this mission done his way and not really play by the rules of authority.
Exactly.
He has no use for the bureaucracy exactly. The by the book. Yeah, exactly.
Trevor Howard's by the book. He's basically M. The scene that really stood out for me in this film, again, not having seen it for a while, is when Trevor Howard goes to get the guy who's gone AWOL. And you think he's really going to come down on him like a hammer. But when he finds out that the guy's wife has left him, then it's like, well, why don't I take you back around there so you can give the guy she jilted before a good beatdown?
Take your time. Yeah. Go on in. That was a great scene.
Yeah.
Have you got your key?
Yes, sir.
And what are you waiting for? Oh, and give my regards to Morris.
And interestingly enough, in the late 50s, when Ian Fleming and some of his partners were thinking of making their own Bond movie before Broccoli and Saltzman came along, one of the guys he thought would have made a good Bond is Trevor Howard.
Oh, interesting. It's funny that he would think that. I mean, because, even in the books, like, the Fleming Bond isn't supposed to be as sort of like maybe refined and aristocratic and sort of bougie as Trevor Howard comes across, So that's an interesting casting choice, by Fleming or casting shortlist or whatever it would be, like the sort of dream casting.
I'm afraid I'm not qualified to comment on the technical possibilities of your plan.
Not having seen Cockleshell Heroes in a while, I didn't think it was that great a film, to be honest. Mm-hmm. It's great because of all those sort of Bond connections that come into it. Between the cast and the crew. Interestingly, you have Christopher Lee showing up as the boat captain near the end.
Right, or the submarine captain or whatever.
Submarine captain. But, Christopher Lee was a cousin of Ian Fleming's. And
crazy.
he,
I didn't know that.
And he was a spy in World War II. And when they were making Dr. No, Ian Fleming suggested they should hire Christopher Lee to play Dr. No.
Oh, crazy.
I don't know why they didn't, because he would have been a good choice,
Wow, that is very interesting.
I remember in one of his interviews, Christopher Lee said people are always saying, about his World War II service, well, were you involved with this? Were you involved with that? And did you do this, do that? And he says, I always say to them, can you keep a secret? And they goes, yeah, sure. And he says, so can I.
Yeah, that's so good.
Yeah.
So how did this movie come about, and how did Jose Ferrer end up directing it? Do you know much about that? Because I didn't know him as a director. I've only known him, like we were saying before, as the Padishah Emperor from Dune,
or Lawrence of Arabia.
Jose Ferrer was a pretty big deal in the 1950s, I think mostly from Broadway, and he was a producer, director, actor on Broadway, where I think maybe Cyrano was one of his big hits on Broadway. He starred in the film version of Cyrano de Bergerac and directed it, which I think got some Academy Award nominations. I'd have to check that to be sure. But yeah, he was pretty highly regarded in that period, so I can see why they might want to get him to be in the film.
The film does feel a bit uneven, though. I kind of see what you're saying. There are some incredibly great moments, and then there's a lot of lulls, especially in a shorter film, like you were saying, like 90-minute film.
And a lot of things that just sort of seem padded out, like the whole, the limpet mine scene where they're training in the pool to how to do the limpet mines, and then it's like, by the way, that's a live mine, and you got 5 minutes to dispose of it. So the whole troop goes running out, and they're encountering the marching band. They encounter the schoolgirls, not nuns, but schoolgirls. And when I see that, all I can think is, Adam West and Batman. But some days you just can't get a bomb. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sergeant, just a little token of our respect and admiration.
You've got just 12 minutes to get rid of that thing, Cooney.
But what's funny is, like, as you're describing that scene, it's like, what is it about it that, like, a lot of it is that maybe the movie's kind of light on story, so that, you have these like padded moments that just like make it drag and feel really long. I mean, it was the shortest of the 3 movies we watched, but it by far felt like the longest. And even in that sequence you're describing, it's like it felt so long. Like, and part of it was like some of the humor that it was going for, it wasn't quite landing, and then it was just like, I don't know, building in the pause for the laughter, but no one's laughing, so it just feels really stiff and not well paced.
So we need to add maybe a laugh track to this movie, and we might nail some of these jokes.
Maybe some yakety sax would have helped that moment.
That would make that scene much better, yakety sax. but the whole movie, it's like from scene to scene, the tone keeps shifting.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One of the things that stood out to me is when they're in the submarine and they're being bombed by the Nazis, and the guy hits his head. And after the things settle down, the guy goes over and feels his pulse, like, well, he's not going to be of any use to us.
Yeah.
Okay, dismiss him. No, crying over his body. It's like, so.
Yeah, well, they spent a long time over this and that, but then like one of the guys dies, and they're like, yeah, well, screw it. All right, anybody else want to hop on this boat?
Yeah, and it's the kind of just dismissiveness and disregard for life that you get in the Bond films. Where
right. Yeah.
Characters get killed. It's like, oh well, move on.
Yeah, I feel like they just kind of did the thing where they pick up his arm, it dropped, and then they're like, all right, he's gone, moving on. Yeah. And that's the end of that guy's scene.
Either he's dead or he's no use to us. He's disabled in some way. Either way.
Checks all the boxes.
Oh, yeah. But man, real quick, on the submarine thing, how much did that remind you of Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? Like, there's that map that's being drawn with the sort of red line, the dotted red line. And then, the Christopher Lee ship captain on the submarine itself, like he kind of reminded me a little bit of
Katanga.
And then, we see the submarine, which again is also out of Raiders too. It's there's something about that, like, where you could definitely feel the influence. I mean, it seems like George Lucas watched this one at some point.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. I do love those scenes though of the depth charges coming down for the boat. I mean, like Das Boot is a great movie if you want to watch a submarine film, and that's some of the scariest stuff in that movie, and I thought that they really succeeded in this one too.
Shut off the depth charge attack.
Coming in fast, sir.
Silent routine. Silent routine. Fire!
Bruce, you're talking about how in Cockle Shells we have this like ever shifting tone, right? These like different sands that we're trying to walk on here, and it's we can't get our footing. I mean, I would say that North by Northwest does that a lot, but does it successfully. I mean, that's that's the difference between Jose Ferrer directing and Alfred Hitchcock directing.
Yeah, absolutely, because Hitchcock's a master at that, and there's still overall a light tone to the film.
Mm-hmm. Sure, yeah.
But
I'd call it a comedy.
Yeah, but the emotional scenes between Cary Grant and Eva Marie Saint really do, have some feeling to it, some real emotion to them.
Well, but that's a good point, though, in terms of like, maybe this one wasn't asking as much of the extremes in North by Northwest. That is, like, there was no moment where that our main heroes were being lined up against the wall and tried to like go down with some dignity. I mean, it's like, so maybe the extremes aren't as much on this one. So like maybe it is a little easier. But still. he does somehow thread sort of the thrills, the humor, and maybe some of the romance, and then some of the actual feeling that the audience has for some of these characters.
But now the interesting thing about this one is Cary Grant, right? And there's a Cubby Broccoli connection there, because Cubby Broccoli, when his second wife had died, his second wife's name was Nedra. When she was dying of cancer back in New York, Broccoli in the late 50s wanted to do the Ian Fleming Bond books. And he went to New York to kind of look after his wife, and his partner, Irving Allen, was going to have lunch with Ian Fleming and Fleming's agent and seal the deal. Unfortunately, when that lunch happened, Irving sits down and says, Irving Allen says that he's kind of looked at the books and frankly, in his opinion, are not even good enough for television. So that kind of killed the deal, and that was the beginning of the end of the association of Irving Allen and Cubby Broccoli. So after Nedra passes away, 1960, Cubby remarried.
Creative differences, as they say.
Exactly, yeah. So 1960, Cubby remarries. He marries a woman named Dana Wilson, who had divorced from an actor named Lewis Wilson, and they had a son named Michael G. Wilson, who's currently the producer of the Bond films, along with his stepsister Barbara. Cool. Interestingly, Michael's dad, Lewis Wilson, was the first screen Batman in the serial of 1943.
Oh, right on.
So the Bond movies are produced by Batman's son,
Awesome.
Yeah. But when Cubby got married to Dana Wilson, his best man was his friend, Cary Grant.
Oh, crazy.
And supposedly, Cubby asked Cary Grant to play James Bond when they were starting the Bond series. To which Grant said no for two reasons. One being that he didn't want to commit to a series of films, because I think he was already at that point thinking about retiring. But the other is that he said my fee would be your entire budget for Dr. No. Yeah, so it didn't work out. But
I'm trying to think of where Cary Grant was at that time career-wise. I mean, was this around Charade? Era, Cary Grant?
Just before that. Charade was 62, 63, I think. So this was 1960. So around Operation Petticoat era,
Okay.
But I mean, again, in North by Northwest, it's 59. He's 55 years old in that film, so he's getting up there. I always felt when I watched Notorious, if you'd gotten Grant at that time playing James Bond, that would have been perfect. But
right.
Mm.
But,
he was in his 50s in this one, huh?
Yeah.
He looked fantastic.
The woman that plays his mother was only 8 years older than he was.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little God, what's it called? A Manchurian Candidate with
Angela Lansbury?
Angela Lansbury, thank you.
A little bit, yeah.
I thought that he was hilarious in this, as well as the direction and the visual gags in it. The one that stuck out to me the most was the tiny razor. And he had to shave his face with that tiny razor, and they're like, "What the hell took you so long?" He's like, "Big face, small razor."
Man, there's so many good ones like that.
Yeah, there's really funny lines in this.
There's a moment I love too where he's been climbing around outside the hotel building in Chicago and goes in through it's a hospital, I think, goes in through the window. And the woman in the bed is like, "Stop!" Puts on her glasses, sees Cary Grant, "Stop."
Yeah. And he's like, Yeah. I think in terms of Bond prototype, that there was that interesting moment where the very first confusion they have with him, the wrong man moment. Kaplan got paged, and then he goes and grabs the telegram guy, and as he's going to send the telegram, that guy grabs his shoulder. And he looks down for a second. He's like, hey, wait a minute, what's that supposed to be? Right? It's just too cool for school. Almost James Bondian level of sort of remove an irony from a dangerous situation.
Yeah, and it's very Bondish in a way that he's kind of unflappable. When he's taken in to meet Van Damme, who's James Mason, who's in full-on Bond villain mode in this, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
But again, just like Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca, he's not taking any guff off this guy. He's just throwing it back at him, as fast as they throw it at him. But it's a little Bondish too, in that it's instead of just taking Roger Thornhill out behind the building and shooting him, it's like, well, we'll fill him full of alcohol and put him in a car and see if he'll run it off a cliff. Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
That was
coming up with
insane.
elaborate plans to try.
Yeah, and then later, I mean, I can see how you could explain, a guy got drunk, stole a car, and ran it off a cliff. That's explainable. How do you explain he turns up in the middle of a field in the middle of nowhere, machine gun from up above?
Yeah, that one might take a little more splaining.
In the dustiest Indiana ever.
Yeah, but it's got a bit of that Bond quality too, in that it's going through several different cities here, because we're starting in New York and Long Island and Chicago, and then out to Rapid City, South Dakota. That kind of increases the pace, because we're kind of jumping one location to the next, to the next, to the next.
And I thought the famous scene that I'd been waiting to see for so long of the crop dusting airplane, I thought that was like a special effects almost extravaganza for the time. Like what they were shooting and like the angles that they were using and the sets that they created. Where he was inside the corn.
Right.
Right. Well, and especially the truck, like him sort of getting basically run over by it, and then having it explode like that as he's running away from it like that.
Insane.
What, was that the first guy to like run away from an explosion in slow motion or whatever?
The walkaway explosion.
Yeah.
I like the Big Lebowski pencil rubbing. Clearly, there was some of that from there. Although whatever got rubbed out on the pencil was a little bit different than what we saw.
Just a little bit.
Lebowski, yeah.
But also like that house on the top of Mount Rushmore or whatever. That's very that crazy mid-century house is kind of Jackie Treehorn-esque, like you were saying.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, in terms of like some of the Bond stuff, yeah, he also like just like you're saying, Bruce, a minute ago, like he just like he was constantly having women thrown at him the whole time, and sort of bat them off with a Casablanca fly swatter. I think one thing though that like still separates his character from sort of the way all of the movie Bonds were, that like he did get sort of emotionally involved with at least one of his female spies or whatever, his love interest here. Unlike Bond in the movies, who basically never has that no one has that effect on him, as I'm trying to say. Like it does in the books, which is maybe why the Broccoli connection to Cary Grant may have seemed more apropos. But in the movie Bond, he's a lot more cavalier with his relationships.
I think once you get to the last couple of Pierce Brosnan movies, to me, Brosnan became the emotionally needy Bond. World is not enough and Die Another Day. I mean, he's rescuing Jinx in Die Another Day when she's drowning and like, breathe. It's like, he just met this woman like a week ago. So, yeah. And you get some of that with Daniel Craig's Bond as well. But
yeah, no, exactly.
But yeah, certainly, with Roger Moore, it's like, let me just swing around and let the woman take the bullet for me.
Yeah, but that's 21st century Bond. That's different. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and this one too, we have another sort of M-type character in The Professor, played by Leo G. Carroll.
Oh, right.
And it was just 5 years after this, he was going to be the boss in The Man from U.N.C.L.E., which was a TV show that was developed with the aid of Ian Fleming. And we do have Cary Grant too as the guy who likes his smokes, likes his drinks, although he doesn't smoke that much in the film. But we do see him ordering that Gibson.
Yeah. Which,
out of curiosity, I did have to look that up. The Gibson is not really a martini. It's 1 part dry vermouth, 6 parts gin, served with a pickled onion. If it were served with a green olive instead of a pickled onion, then it would be a martini.
Well, I mean, if you want to get into it, like
So to give you a little background of Jeremy real quick, Bruce, Jeremy also has a YouTube channel called Distinguished Spirits.
And, okay.
He creates videos and tells the stories behind certain drinks. So I'm going to let him go ahead and
please correct
school
me.
us a little bit.
No, I guess the way Bond is to you, some of these drinks are to me. It's weird that like the Gibson was developed, roughly maybe 10-ish years after the martini, the sort of dry martini that you're familiar with. We don't really know why it was named the Gibson. There's a couple different theories about who it could have been named after. But essentially, the distinguishing characteristic was that there was no orange bitters in it, because originally the dry martini was gin, dry vermouth, and orange bitters, and either a lemon twist or an olive. The Gibson was just gin and dry vermouth, no bitters, and no garnish at first. And then eventually, sort of after Prohibition, the way to sort of distinguish it from a martini was the pickled onion.
Are orange bitters no longer an ingredient that's used?
Well, after Prohibition, orange bitters were pretty much not available up until maybe about 2006 or 7, when they started, slowly producing them again. Now you can get them anywhere, and you can, make the sort of proper martini, which our good friend James Bond helped, destroy in the minds of everyone. Which is that a martini is shaken and it's not stirred, and it's made with vodka, and there's just a wisp of vermouth in it or whatever. A lot of that actually came out of the movie Bond, and how everyone sort of perceived all that. That and the way Prohibition had kind of a brain drain of a generation of bartenders either having to leave the country to keep working or whatever, and right, a confluence of those things, and then the sort of heavy marketing of vodka at the time in the sort of mid 60s.
So it got lost and evolved.
Exactly, got lost in the fray.
Wow,
but anyway,
that's interesting. Yeah.
More than you ever wanted to know about.
I'm very thirsty right now.
Yeah.
So, I will say, I've a lot of my friends are James Bond fanatics like me, and when we were younger and would go into clubs and bars and so on, there was one of my friends who would often go to the bartender and say, martini shaken, not stirred. Mm-hmm. And it just brought home to me how you cannot order that without just looking like a jerk. It just doesn't quite work. I always felt that the best way to order a martini for me was Walter Matthau in A Face in the Crowd, where he's in the bar and he says, "Martini, Joe. Make it a strong one. Just let the vermouth blow a kiss at the gin."
I like that.
That's how you order a martini.
Cocktail before dinner?
Yes, please. A Gibson.
Right away.
Getting back to North by Northwest, did either of you guys have enough drinks to notice in the scene where Eve Kendall shoots Roger Thornhill in the restaurant at Mount Rushmore? Did you notice the kid in the background?
No.
No.
Well, if next time you watch the movie, watch the kid just kind of in between the two of them in the background. Because obviously this is not the first take they're using. Because when she pulls out that gun, before she fires, you see that kid plug his fingers in his ears.
Really? I gotta watch that.
The
one
kid was
again.
just an astute observer of her face and the way that
he
could tell.
He
yeah,
knew
exactly.
What was coming, yeah.
That she was gonna fuck him up. That's really funny.
There's also a couple of superheroes in the movie in the auction scene. Because the auctioneer is Les Tremayne, who was Mentor in the Shazam series, Saturday morning series in the 70s.
Please, sir. The gentleman can't do that.
Great radio voice,
Would the gentleman please cooperate?
And the guy who plays his assistant there is an actor named Olin Soule. He played the choir director on the Andy Griffith Show. But he was also the voice of Batman in the Super Friends. So, yes, it all comes together. I'm telling you, it's all connected.
Robin, Aquaman, Superman, to the Batmobile.
There's one other thing in North by Northwest when Valerian, it's like, the villain with two henchmen, which is a kind of Bond trope, right? So you've got Leonard is the one villain, and then you've got the other guy, Valerian, the knife thrower. Mm-hmm. And in the scene where Valerian at the UN throws the knife in the guy's back, before he does it, he puts on the black gloves, which is very much like Robert Shaw in From Russia with Love, where before he kills anyone, he puts on the black gloves. Richard Williams, I think the actor's name was, and the Martin Landau character. When you get to the end of the movie, it's pretty obvious that he's a homosexual, and that Van Damme is probably bisexual and may have had something going on with Leonard. You know, you're jealous when he's talking about Eve Kendall. You know.
Oh, right.
So, you know, I mean, Leonard's like, you know, how did he know about the blanks in the gun? Call it my woman's intuition.
Yeah.
So, but it is one of the great endings in movies too, to go from hanging on Mount Rushmore to being pulled up into a train right before it enters the tunnel, and that really phallic scene.
I have that note here. That final cut of pulling her from the monument up into the bed. I thought that was incredible.
Well, if we ever get out of this alive, let's go back to New York on the train together. All right?
Is that a proposition?
It's a proposal, sweetie.
Did they actually make it? Is the real question?
Oh,
right. That's a great question. You mean is that left up to interpretation?
Kind of, because they did say something about how they, you know, were dreaming about making it out of there. I can't remember what the line was exactly, but then you know, and then we see in this very dreamlike cut, "Come on up here, Mrs. Thornhill," or whatever.
It's the end of Dreamscape when they're in the train. You know?
Well, that was definitely a direct allusion to this thing. But
until you've said that, I've never thought of it in that way. But I think Hitchcock was a little more of a literalist and would have thought, they made it, they got out of there. You know.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, but I mean, you know, I don't know, Hitchcock and some of his movies, even the ending of Rear Window, which is a little similar, or you know, the way that Vertigo progresses, where it feels like there's something not literal happening, you know.
Well, Vertigo clearly is a very psychological film, you know.
Yeah.
So that was just kind of its own thing. But yeah, I mean, I'd always interpreted it as now they got off the mountain, you know.
But this one is almost like kind of a Kafka-esque, you know, a persecution story where it's like, you know, everyone's after him. And, you know, he doesn't know why and where it's coming from. And, you know, so, like this gross paranoia. You know, there's a little bit of like psychological stuff going on, but maybe you don't notice it as much because you're having so much fun versus Vertigo where it's not quite as fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think the dialogue in this film is phenomenal, you know, and then just Hitchcock's directing, his camera placement, the movements, everything's wonderful, all the performances. And it's probably one of his best MacGuffins, you know. Because it's all about that microfilm, you know.
Right.
Yeah,
and
what's on that microfilm?
We have no idea what's on the microfilm. The microfilm are the letters of transit of this movie.
Yeah.
So,
I like that, though. That's the mystery, right? That could be absolutely anything. And I think that's what broadens the mystery of it.
It makes me think of the end of The Rock. You know,
yeah, exactly. You want to see who shot JFK?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, he had that same footage on that microfilm, exactly. But it was before they shot JFK. See, it's a conspiracy. It all ties together. It's a conspiracy.
Oh my God!
Mind blown. Yeah, you didn't see that one coming, did you?
And who co-stars in The Rock? Sean Connery.
Sean Connery. There you
come
go.
On, come on. It's yeah.
I was going to say Ed Harris. I don't know. Oh yeah.
And he's co-starring with Nicolas Cage, whose real name is Nicholas Coppola, because he's the nephew of Francis Coppola, whose brother-in-law, who was married to his sister Talia Shire, produced Never Say Never Again.
Holy shit.
This is worse than 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Right?
The 18 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Kevin Bacon, who was in JFK. Oh my God.
Whoa.
Oh man.
I think I'm ready for a cocktail now. Boy.
Yeah, I think we slid all the way off of Washington's nose at this point.
Well, Bruce, do you have anything you'd like you know, the listeners to know about you or what you're working on? I know you've got some great things that you're working on currently, but I'd love to hear it.
Well, right now I'm producing a sort of reboot of an older show. We're calling it The Miracle Show, which is sort of reality series looking at sort of uplifting, feel-good stories. This will be on streaming outlets probably in the fall, YouTube and Amazon, Hulu, those sort of things.
Oh, cool.
We need good news stories.
We do, yeah, and it's been a lot of fun putting these together. You know, I've been writing screenplays for years and trying to sell them, and still doing that.
Any current scripts that are you know, showing some interest or gaining some interest, or anything that you're proud of that you want to
Well, as you may be aware, I just recently finished a screenplay that's called The Last Stage, or Wyatt Earp's Dying Dream, which is set in the 1920s and kind of begins following the last days of Wyatt Earp as he's dying of uremic poisoning in L.A., where he's working as a consultant on silent westerns. But as he's dying, I found out Wyatt Earp's final words were "suppose." So that gave me the idea of doing a film that really is, here's this guy who's this legendary Western lawman dying, laying down in a bed of old age. How would he like to have gone out? Mm-hmm. So then we go into his sort of dream of, going out to his mining claims and getting involved with some roughnecks and having a shootout at the end and all that kind of thing. So, but
I love it. It's called Citizen Earp.
I tell people that it's a Western if Ingmar Bergman had directed a Western, or David Lynch maybe. So it's a sort of fantasy Western.
We should get David Lynch attached to this one. That'd be quite an interesting take on that script. Yeah.
From your mouth to David Lynch's ears. So.
Yeah. He's a listener. So next week we have another very special guest for another inspiring show. We've been doing inspiring before. This one is going to be inspiring one of my favorite films. We are going to be talking about inspirations for Kill Bill. Kill Bill Volume 1 specifically.
Yeah.
We'll be looking at Lady Snowblood, The Bride Wore Black, and of course Kill Bill Volume 1. And we're joined by a guest. Jeremy, who are we joined by?
A composer buddy of mine, Omar Fidel. He and I had been talking to him a little bit about doing an episode, and I had thrown out a couple ideas to him, and this one was something he was really excited about because he was like, "Oh, I haven't seen Kill Bill in a while, so it'd be a lot of fun to revisit that." So yeah, he'll help us unpack the origins of Kill Bill.
That sounds excellent. Very excited for that. Thank you so much for listening. Please make sure to subscribe and follow us on all the podcasts and social platforms at the Grindhouse Institute. And if you really want to give us a boost, check us out on Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. It helps us to get noticed. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll be back next week.
Ciao.
How can you close me up? On what ground?
I'm shocked to find that gambling is going on in here.
You're winning, sir.
Oh, thank you very much. Everybody out at once.